There often comes a time in a master's student or a doctoral student's academic career path where they have to kind of figure out a research idea, and there may be some trouble in identifying what may be the best research idea for a given set of circumstances or for a person's given interest. That said, there are a few frequently asked questions that I encounter, and I've encountered a couple this semester. One of the questions I get is, nobody has ever done anything on the topic I want to do. So that's one question I get. Another question that's kind of related to like the current circumstances would be something like, I wonder if I can study X, Y, or Z as it relates to people during the pandemic, since there have never been any published articles on this exact topic. Seriously, I cannot find one single article on this topic. So I hear those concerns a good bit. Not necessarily always related to the pandemic, but where people are looking for a very specific topic and they just cannot find background literature on it. So I would often kind of retort or ask back to them something to the effect of this. Is it a problem then? And in the case of the pandemic one, there's a different underlying issue there. But in this particular kind of bigger question is, if there's never been any research done on it at all, is it actually a problem? So are there no published like epidemiological studies on the actual health outcome of interest? So if you're looking at something like asthma or anything like that, there's never been a study that's been done that just even describes how common this particular illness may be. Another question I often ask back would be something like, are there related studies? It's actually a good thing from a research idea or research standpoint that the topic you're interested in is a topic that really nothing has actually been done on. So if you think it's a problem and no one's ever done research on that problem, then that's actually a good thing. But there probably is a good foundation from whereby you can maybe build out your research idea. So using related studies. And I'll show an example towards the end of this. We also need to ask ourselves, what's the goal of public health research? What's our job here? So this is getting at kind of, here are there related studies? So what's the goal of public health research? I encourage you to ask yourself that, why do people do public health research? I'm going to ask you this. Are we merely seeking to just complete an assignment or just do a literature review? Or are we actually seeking to not only understand a problem, but to actually generate or provide new knowledge or a new approach to actually address the problem? So that's kind of a bigger kind of question. So when you're entering this program, what we're trying to do is prepare you for actually going into the workforce or going into like an academic enterprise, whereby you're going to be skilled at actually addressing new problems. And you're not going to be able to address new problems all the time by just seeing if everybody else has already done something on it or somebody else has done something on it. And in the event that somebody else has done something on it, if there's only one study or one group that's actually published any type of report that you can find that's worked on that topic, there's no assurance that that was a large enough study or a large enough kind of investigation to actually be right. So you may need to do additional studies. So when there's not a lot of data out there on a topic, additional studies on that topic may be warranted, specifically if it's addressing a unique population like the one you may be interested in. So getting back at that bigger question, what's the goal of public health research? So there's kind of basic research and applied research, and we'll get to that later, but for the most part, a lot of what you'll be doing on the job and a lot of what Master of Public Health folks typically do if they have to do research is applied. You're trying to address a problem. And how do we address problems? Well, we have to look at, in many cases, related problems and how we may have handled those related problems. So there are lessons that we can learn in regards to a lot of public health problems from other public health problems that we've experienced in the past. It's your job with the background search to be able to weave together that story of these other research ideas that may help build upon your ultimate hypothesis. Not that you have to have a hypothesis, and we'll cover that more later in the class, but it is upon you to be able to figure out what's been done on potentially other related topics that may help you figure out how to best hone in on whatever topic you're going to focus on. And again, I'll give you an example at the end of this video. So another question I may get in some cases is the opposite. Rather than it being too narrow, maybe too broad. So I want to do a study on health disparities and income. Is that okay? Or I want to do a study on asthma and low-income communities. Or I want to do a study on asthma and air pollution. Is that okay? Well, it kind of is okay, but what ends up happening is you will find that that topic is overly broad. So there's a tremendous volume of literature out there on asthma, particularly as it affects like low-income communities, asthma and its relationship with like air particulates. There's a tremendous amount of information out there on health disparities as it relates to being a function of income. So those types of topics are overly broad. So then you need to go back and ask yourself that earlier question: how would it be possible for a person like you or anyone to generate new knowledge or a new strategy in that particular area, more so than what has already been done? So how are we going to contribute some scholarship here? How are we going to make an improvement? How are we going to develop an intervention that's going to be new or better? It's going to actually be something that's not been done already. If we already knew the answers to these research problems, they wouldn't be problems. So we don't have the answers yet. So new knowledge, new strategies, new areas whereby we probably need to be looking. So how can you tackle one of those bigger overarching problems that you know the problem exists in society, but you're not going to be able to solve it with an MPH project? In many cases, research is contributing to a larger body of work that's not just you. It's, tens of thousands of people sometimes on huge topics contributing answers or contributing ideas in the form of scholarship to address a larger problem. So how can you address it from your particular space in this world? And it could be that we can focus on a population of interest or an exposure of interest, presumably linked to your concentration as a discipline. So if you're a community health or health promotion type person, or if you're an environmental health person or a nutrition type person, how can we focus on a particular population and whatever the area of interest may be to you? So there are some key questions you have to ask yourself when you're going in to a research endeavor. Particularly if you're a MPH student, we're dealing with this a lot of social distancing right now, but even as an MPH student at a non-research university where we don't have expensive laboratories, how are you going to be able to complete some sort of research type task for your final MPH project? Or how are you going to assess some intervention for your final graduate project? So you have to ask yourself, what approaches are out there that exist for you to be able to obtain data on whatever your topic of interest is? And is the research question that you're interested in asking able to actually be addressed? You're probably not going to be able on a research question to actually answer it. there are a lot of research questions that are still out there, that have been out there and plaguing the scientific community, not necessarily plaguing, but inspiring maybe the scientific community, providing opportunities to the scientific community, including the public health community, that we have not been able to figure out. We haven't been able to successfully address them because there's still public health problems that still need to be addressed. So what approaches are out there for you to be able to contribute new knowledge on that topic? Whether it be how could you develop an intervention that you could then potentially assess as part of your final graduate course, or it could be how do you contribute new knowledge showing us where a problem may exist where we didn't know it existed, or showing an association between two particular phenomena where maybe nobody has previously observed that. So we'll look at some data sources in the future for you on those particular approaches. So we're going to look at some potential options. There are ecologic type study designs where we can pull data from national databases, and there are experimental designs that you could develop through tox studies. There are experimental study designs where you could have a kind of a design where one group gets an intervention, another group doesn't. We can have designs whereby they're cross-sectional in nature and you're going to engage in some sort of survey. So there's a lot of options out there for obtaining data on your topic of interest, but it's important to understand the background literature and what's been done, and potentially learn from some of the other research strategies that have been employed by others in the area that you're interested in. So later in the course, we're going to be able to answer this last question, and I might get to it some today as well. Are there data sources available already that you could potentially use to help address whatever your research topic might be? So ultimately, what's the big goal here? What's the goal? Why do we run you through this research process type course? What's the purpose here? And I ask you this question here. Will the research community, or a company, or a business, or a government agency, or government agencies, or a community group, or an advocacy organization, or any others be able to recognize your finished product as a meaningful contribution? Would they want to read it? Would they think that they could learn something from it because they believe that it may contribute or hold some promise to result in some type of improvement for public health or for workers? Or they'll read it understanding that they may need to learn from it because there may be new or better questions to ask, or certain populations that have not been appropriately represented in previous work, and you may have contributed new knowledge showing that some exposure or some phenomena exists in that population at a certain level that's previously never been described. So will people value your research? It doesn't have to be a whole lot of people, but will people actually look at your finished product as a meaningful contribution? We're not looking here for literature review for the sake of literature review for your final project for this MPH program. That's what this class is a big part of, is doing the literature review. The final product, your final graduate level paper, should represent some sort of meaningful contribution that you provide new knowledge, not a summary of existing information. That's what's done in this class, and that summary is still helpful as a meaningful contribution, but it's not the meaningful contribution that you will ultimately be able to provide, where you will add new knowledge, new data, or a new idea or a new intervention that can be implemented. So those are the questions that I encourage you to be able to ask yourself. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to let me know. You can email me. We can also set up a Zoom meeting, and I'm going to pull up a article here for your consideration, just to kind of show you where sometimes there are limitations that exist. So this was an article on the assessment of temperature and ultraviolet radiation effects on sunburn incidents at an inland U.S. beach. You're looking at the relationship between outdoor temperature and UVR on sunburn. We had data on sunburn already, had data, potentially available from the Weather Service and from some other places where I could actually get temperature and UV just to see whether or not temperature and UV would increase the frequency of sunburn, which we would expect. Like you would expect that. That's a good hypothesis. But there are some people that were speculating temperature may be more important than UVR, because when temperatures get really hot, people take off more of their clothes at the beach, and potentially even stay at the beach longer. So which is more important, UVR or temperature, was kind of a question. And how common is sunburn among people that swim versus that don't swim? Knowing that like sunscreen and that kind of stuff washes off sometimes in the water. So there were a lot of studies out there on sunscreen failure, but never on like beach users. There have been studies done on like lifeguards at pools over a summer. There have been studies on hikers and skiers with regards to sunburn, but nobody had ever done a study on sunburn among people who go to like the lakes, who just go to like, houseboats, or in this case, who go to an actual public beach. So these were good questions to ask in 2016, 2017. There have been a couple other studies since then that have also looked at beach users, but there were no other studies on this topic, but there were studies on other related phenomena. So you're able to kind of pull together all the literature that's out there, on the frequency of sunburn as it's been estimated in the population, the cancer endpoints, that could potentially, how big of a problem is this? The economics, how much does this health problem potentially cost? So there's a lot of related studies that you can pull from to be able to make your project potentially go. Again, if you're having any issues trying to narrow your project and your idea down, that's okay. We're going to get better at narrowing it, but we should be thinking about how are we going to collect data, or how are we going to develop an intervention that could be employed on the job or could be potentially tested with respect to whether or not it accomplishes what it's aiming to do. So I'm going to stop the video here. Again, you've got my email information. Feel free to reach out should you need to do so.